Scenes like these are rare in Kazakhstan. Protests have erupted in several cities as outrage over an increase in fuel prices have spread across the country. Violent clashes have followed, particularly in the largest city, Almaty, with reports of a fire and gunshots heard near the mayor's office where demonstrators tried to storm the building earlier in the week. What began as protests against fuel prices has turned into a wider call for government accountability.
It quickly took a political angle where people started calling for free elections of local officials, started calling for the ouster of top officials in the government. So they're working to get this kind of under control as much as they can. This is going to hurt the reputation of the Kazakh government. Kazakhstan has always been fairly stable.
The cost of liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, which is widely used as car fuel, more than doubled to 28 cents a liter when the government lifted price caps. But amid political pressure, the government of the oil-rich country said the price would go back to 11 cents a liter in Mangistau in the west and in other provinces. Faced with a minimum wage of less than $100 a month, protesters say the increase is unacceptable. Kazakhstan's president sacked his cabinet and appointed a new acting prime minister. Now he's calling for the unrest to stop.
Calls to attack civilian and military officers are completely illegal. It is a crime and that will be punished. Power will not fall. What we need is not conflict, but mutual trust and dialogue.
The government has argued LPG subsidies are unsustainable in the long term. But its plan to phase out price caps over 3 years is being fiercely resisted. The Central Asian country, long known in the region for its political stability, now faces widespread unrest. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Joining us now from Kiev is Peter Zalmayev, Executive Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Peter Zalmayev, welcome to the NewsHour. There was trouble in exactly this area a decade ago. That was really messy then. Do you see something similar heading our way now?
In fact, yes, you're right. The city of Zhanaozen, a new sort of violence that Kazakhstan had never known in its post-Soviet independent history. Exactly 11 years ago, over 16 people died in that city in similar protests. What is different this time is that the protests then, they were confined to the western oil-producing part of the country. They have now this time spread to the rest of the country. They have engulfed the main city of Kazakhstan, Almaty, and the capital city, Nur-Sultan, named after the de facto ruler of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who remains the de facto main political actor in Kazakhstan. So what we're seeing now, the formal, the formal excuse for the protest is the lifting of the cap on liquefied petroleum gas in a country where, as your reporter mentioned, salaries are pretty modest by world standards. On the other hand, we are seeing increasingly political demands being added to the protesters to the point there where their main demand, or one of their main demand, is for the ouster of the government, which has in fact happened, does not satisfy them any longer. So this is a very, very scary situation. It's threatening to spiral out of control. And then one may wonder what the government may be forced to do, may be forced to call on Vladimir Putin to help and step in. That is a big question.
That sounds as if it's got the makings of being a situation that is not only dangerous for the country, but dangerous for the wider region. Because if the Russians walk in, the chances of the Russians walking out must be pretty slim, especially in the short term, at least.
As someone, as you mentioned, I'm sitting and based in Kiev, in Ukraine. I know better than many people that indeed, when Vladimir Putin moves in, it is so far there's no precedent for him to be moving out. You look at Moldova, you look at Georgia, you look at the eastern Ukraine, and there's clearly more than enough precedent in Kazakhstan for that to happen. The entire northern part of Kazakhstan is largely Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian population. Vladimir Putin has in the past hinted that he does not view Kazakhstan as a viable sovereign nation. In fact, one time saying that, Kazakhstan does not have much experience in sovereignty, in nation building. That has sent shudders through the spines of the political establishment for a potential, let's say, scenario whereby Russia moves in and creates some kind of a people's republic in northern Kazakhstan, the way they did in Ukraine. And you mentioned the geopolitical situation. You have to keep in mind China, that is also sitting right next to Kazakhstan. It is very wary about what is happening across the border because it has its interests. It has its billions of dollars invested in Kazakhstan, and it receives gas from Kazakhstan as well.
Peter, just to get your thoughts on three aspects or three areas of discussion that we're getting as you're talking to us now. We're getting reports that the Kazakh president has been saying he would act as tough as possible. He's also saying he will stay in the capital. He is also saying he takes over as the chairman of the Security Council. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's in fact, the chairman of the Security Council is former President Nazarbayev. It looks like now there's decision made at the very top that there's need for very, very strong action. So far, and there is precedent for that in the region. In the neighboring Uzbekistan in 2005, there was an uprising in Andijan. It was quelled at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dead. And so I think the government is now smelling real trouble. Tokayev signed the decree ousting the government. That has not placated the protesters, which means that they're calculating that they will be making a very, very drastic decision. It may involve live ammunition against the protesters, and God knows where it will lead.
Very, very briefly, Peter, we're almost out of time, please. Would he have done that, those three things that we're now discussing, would he do that unless he thought it would be greenlit by the Kremlin if he was to ask the Kremlin, do you think this is a good idea?
I think he's pretty much has the backing of the Kremlin. The Kremlin has always backed using force against peaceful protesters.
OK, we must leave it there, Peter. Good to get your thoughts on this developing story. Peter Zalmayev there talking to us from Kiev. Thank you.